Welcome to People I Think Are Cool. I'm your host, Liz Reed, one part of the art duo Cuddles and Rage, and this is my podcast where I interview cool, interesting, creative people. On today's show, we have Sophia Glock. I have known Sophia for a very long time through Instagram. Isn't that kind of how I do all these intros? I met them on Instagram. I just connect with people on Instagram for a decade. And then after that, I just say, hey, we should have a real conversation. But, I reached out to Sophia because her debut graphic novel, I talked to her last year. So it was about to come out, and I wanted to help celebrate the book. I released the audio version early, but I'm just now getting to the video version. So if you guys don't know that I'm doing video now, you want to see the beautiful faces of everybody that I talk to, then you can go to the People I Think Are Cool YouTube page. But in the meantime, definitely come and listen to this conversation with Sophia. We talk about her new book, Passport. I got to read an advance copy, and it was awesome. I was so thankful I got to check it out before we chatted. And then when the book came out, and I believe it was late November of 2021, I got to celebrate it again. And also, by that time, check out all the reviews. And, she got to talk to NPR. She got to talk to, I think it's Geeked Out, all these different places. If you go to her website, you'll just see, stellar reviews for Passport, because it's a great book. And she wrote it from a very personal place, because it's an autobiography about her time growing up overseas with parents, CIA agents. So yeah, it's hard to say because it's hard to believe that that's really what she grew up with. And that's what makes this book just so special, is getting her perspective on growing up as a young woman while also finding out about this huge family secret. So stay tuned for the end of the show, where I share, every episode now, I share a movie recommendation that's kind of tied into the show. And this week's is a good one. Until then, enjoy this great interview with Sophia. My first question is actually about something I just saw on your Instagram, which is, you mentioned kolaches. And yes. I am from Texas, in the German Polish area. That's where my family, my grandparents or my mom grew up. So we take kolaches really seriously. But I've learned over the years that the definition of kolache is very different to people in different regions. So what is your definition of the kolache?
I mean, I'm new here. I'd never heard of them.
Wait, where are you based?
I'm in Austin. I just moved to Austin, Texas.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. And yeah, isn't there a word for, it's Deutsch Texan or Texan? And I'd never heard of them. I had no idea until I moved here and started researching that there was a German, culture here, but there's Pflugerville, and I was Pflugerville, that is German,
Yeah, Weimar is where my family is, so it's okay. Weimar.
Yeah, that's it's kind of, it's funny, it's weird. Everything, I don't know. I've moved a lot, as you know, and the best thing about moving a lot is having your expectations defied by almost every culture you enter, and sort of the stereotypes, where they line up, where they're true and where they are not. Anyways, not that but no, I didn't expect to find a bunch of German stuff moving to Austin, and I just discovered a donut store near me called Combo Donuts, and they have kolaches, and I think I'm saying it right. Mm-hmm. And I was and the best way I could describe it was, and I was telling my sister about them, and I was they're big pigs in blankets, with the full hot dog. And then I was it's a pig in a slanket. And that's what I was
where that image came from.
That's where the image came from. So then I was a pig in a slanket. And I was that's kind of funny. It's worth drawing and not putting on Instagram, so.
No, totally. So if you go to Weimar, though, or LaGrange area, that is not a kolache.
That is not okay.
That is not.
What is it?
That is a pig in the blanket, period.
Period.
But then
not
a
allowed.
kolache is like the sweetbread with like fruit or poppy seed in the middle. And so like some people call like the pig in the blanket like a savory kolache. And then a sweet kolache is like the fruit one. But if you go to Weimar and LaGrange, it's like, no, that's a pig
it's not
in the
allowed.
blanket.
They make the heavy distinction. That's funny. Combo donuts in Austin, Texas does not.
Shipley doesn't either, which you're like, okay.
I'm taking notes, Liz.
Oh no. But that's hilarious because you really don't know a lot about kolaches. And like I'm in the DC area. And so like people from LaGrange came up here and they opened a kolache shop. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is like kolaches became trendy in DC and then they moved up to New York, and it just cracked me up because so funny. It's just such a like a, you know, in Texas, such a like mom and pop thing.
Trends, man. Yeah.
Totally.
I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia for a couple of years, and they have something there called a pepperoni roll. Have you ever had one of these?
I just picked up some pepperoni rolls yesterday, even though I'm pescatarian, but my husband,
not so much. Yeah, I was definitely like, okay, whatever. I was like, oh, it's a pepperoni and bread. That's not a thing. Like you're describing like, I was like, it's basically a calzone. And they're like, no, it's a pepperoni roll. And I was like, what is this? And I get it. And it's funny because it's like, it's just meat wrapped in bread. Like, what's the big deal here? And then you're like, no, this is its thing. It's its own thing somehow. And it's usually when people are obsessed with those like regionalisms, it's for good reason. Like, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
yes. I was told I was cutting it wrong yesterday. So I totally get it.
I made it that far.
Yeah. Okay. But we are here to talk about your book, Passport.
Okay.
I guess first off, like, how did that pitch go? Because if you can just give like a brief like book talk and then talk about pitching it, because I feel like your story is an easy sell just based on like a one-liner.
Yeah. You know, it was easy in the sense that, yes, I think that it's very pitchable. I do think that's why I sold it. You know, it's got like sort of, it's just got like an immediate appeal. Like, oh, the hook is so obvious, right? You know, but for me, it was personally very difficult because this was not something I discussed openly ever. You know, and I remember actually my initial pitch emails and query letters would literally even mention that, like, even writing this email makes me nervous. You know what I mean? So for me personally, it was difficult, but yeah, when you write it down, it looks so sort of, and I actually became very self-conscious about it because ultimately it's a coming of age story, you know, and ultimately it's really
pull back for a second just so people know,
sorry,
like
yes.
what is the pitch that people,
because that's even this. So even me talking about it now belies my continuing hesitancy around discussing this stuff openly, even though I just wrote a book about it. But I grew up overseas. I grew up moving from country to country to country. And I discovered in my teen years that my family did not work for like, they were always just very sort of like broad or, you know, evasive, but my family worked in intelligence. Both my parents were intelligence officers, if you will. And they worked for the CIA. And so this is the sort of like essential crux of my book, because it was that discovery, a discovery I made, not because they told me, but because I discovered it by spying on them, which was a neat little inversion of our relationship. And how that sort of began to shape my high school years, living as an American overseas. And in general, it is just a story about what it is, or at least for me, what it was to be an American living not in America.
Yeah. I mean, do you think you'll ever get over that hump of saying that your parents were CIA agents? Because, you know, in the book, you talk so much about secrecy, and it's almost like you had to have like this unspoken blood pact with your family that if you released the secret, I mean, you could jeopardize everybody's lives.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then there's the secondary sort of level of it where, it's not just like my family. It's like, this is, their connection to sort of like all sorts of people, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just ultimately like I don't think I'll ever fully get over my discomfort around it because, partially I am talking about things that have nothing to do with me. Right. But at the same time, this was my life. It affected every aspect of my life. It affected the person I am today. It affected all my relationships within and without my family, and it affected the culture of my family. So if I'm ever going to write about myself, I actually kind of have to address this. And so I did. I just jumped in and I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to talk about this, and without sort of compromising anybody or giving details that I wouldn't actually even, that I, one, may know, but shouldn't divulge. And most of the time had no idea, what was going on, obviously, in the terms of the particulars. But yeah, I don't think I'll fully ever get over just saying straight up, my parents were CIA.
Oh, no, it sounds like such a movie script, like
a little bit
cheesy Spy Kids kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's why even pitching the book was difficult, because I wanted to make sure that I connected with the people who knew what I was actually doing, because years and years ago, I did pitch this to an editor who was like looking for comics. And they were like, oh, it's like Spy Kids, like, ooh, think about the TV rights. Let's write a script, blah, blah, blah. Like, how about we change it and make it like this? And I was like, oh, dear, like, no. You don't understand what this is about. Like, this is about a family's culture, not about, cloaks and daggers and, top secret stamps and magnifying glasses or whatever, or microfilm, like whatever, sort of stereotypes you're introducing has nothing to do with what my family lived. Yeah.
No, and good for you. Because a lot of people, catch themselves in the situation that's like, ooh, you're handing me a book deal. Yes, I'll compromise everything.
I'll do whatever I need to do to get this. Yeah.
Right. So let's, I think the most craziest thing that I read was actually at the very end of the book, where you actually had to get government permission to write this. Was that something that was recommended by your parents or the publisher?
So this is not something I talk about in the book, but I worked at the agency in a non-secret capacity. And when you do that, you do sign away you sign an agreement that says that you will seek approval for anything that speaks to your work. And to be on the safe side, I did submit this book, and it was a requirement of my book deal. And even though my book does not talk about any work I did, because it talks about work that other people did, I did have to get this reviewed and approved by the powers that be. And that process was more harrowing than I thought it would be. I thought it would be pretty simple, but there are worse stories. There are people whose books, have never been approved, and there are people who defy the board and go ahead and get approval and face legal repercussions. And, we could discuss like the fairness of the system, but there is a system, and I did agree to it. And I'm glad that I got the approval in the end, because I can sort of like put it into the world without sort of wincing or double thinking whether or not I, compromised anybody who may still be doing this sort of work.
Yeah. I mean, you're nowhere like a Edward Snowden situation, but you wouldn't
No.
want to put your own family in a position where if you like really piss people off, I mean, it's just so easily now for people to go after
Yeah.
you over the littlest thing.
Yeah.
When you did the review though, was there stuff that was cut out? Because I guess going
Absolutely.
into this with the pitch, like I thought it would be a little bit heavier on the CIA part.
So, ultimately the book wasn't, never focused, in no iteration did it ever focus on basically things, again, that I like. I'm very careful about speculating. Does that make sense? And
Sure.
and I was very careful about sort of only speaking to the things that I could sort of speak to confidently. That being said, there were things that I really wanted to talk about that ultimately I had to cut. A lot more was cut than I expected, because I thought I submitted, basically a draft, like a fairly complete draft. And I thought that I was so careful and so circumspect, and apparently I wasn't circumspect enough.
Wow.
So a lot of details, a lot of sort of like obvious details, like the details where, are sort of the things where you might go like, where is that? That sort of got cut. But even the cuts that they requested and were not in the end essential to the heart of the story, which was really about relationships and in these circumstances, so.
Yeah. And I think a lot about, how relatable it is, like that point that you said, like, thinking about your parents when you're growing up and like writing about that, because I don't have any plans to write a memoir, but in my mind, when I'm jogging and I'm like, oh, what would I write about? Like, I feel like I specifically would have a section saying that this is my viewpoint. It's not the viewpoint of my brother. It's not the viewpoint of my parents, because, when you're growing up and the people around you, that's your narrative. And it could not even be the true narrative.
Yeah.
It's just what you've rewritten in your head. And I think everybody should go into a memoir knowing that in a way, it is going to always be like a little bit fiction.
I mean, yeah, this is one story, and it's one point of view, you know what I mean? Like, there were different stories I could have told. They would have all been true. I could have focused on certain different things. I could have made this a book about a lot of different things, because one of the frustrating things about memoir is realizing just how messy our lives are, how messy our own minds are, how messy our relationships are, how you can actually experience conflicting things. You know what I mean? Like, I could have, I had to make the choices to like play up certain aspects of my own personality and tone down aspects of other people's personalities. My relationship with my sister is super complicated. You have a sibling. It's, you just mentioned, I don't know exactly the tone of your relationship, but me and my sister have been like contentious and competitive, but also always intimate, always close, always cooperative, always a simpatico. These things that are like seemingly in conflict exist side by side in most of our relationships. But when you're telling a story, you kind of have to serve the story. So there were things about my relationship with my sister that fell aside, and I focused on one strain of our story. Things with my mother specifically, I feel like my mom got like, she needed to play a role in this story, and I had to play up certain aspects of my relationship with my mother. But you might read the book and be like, wonder how close we were. And the answer is we were very, very close. We also had a big wall between us. And both of these things can be true.
That's a really good point, because I think people can go into the book and sense that your parents were a little cold, but it's more like they were protective.
Yeah.
And didn't have a choice in many ways. When you went to them and said that, hey, I'm going to pitch this book and write it, what was that conversation like?
I was so relieved. They were very supportive. They don't, that's all, like, nobody in my family, as far as I know, is currently employed by the government. So, they basically, they were incredibly supportive. I think they knew that this time would come at some point. I don't know if they ever thought I would publish. But they said they gave me their blessing, and it was almost like one of those things where I'm like, are you sure? And I wanted their blessing. I probably would have kept writing, but it would have been more painful. So I was very relieved to get their okay on it.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Because I can't imagine having that conversation to write about people in your life honestly, and then to have them read that. I mean, I feel like people need to die off for me before I could even like approach that.
I know. Well, I mean, it's very weird because now I'm starting to talk to people about the book, and everybody, of course, is curious about my parents' reactions. And I actually hesitate to share like this incredibly painful reality is that I'll never know what my dad will think about my book because he passed away last Christmas. And I don't even know what to do with it because in so many ways, the book is about a lot of things, but there's a lot of my dad in it. And I was terrified of what he would think. And now I don't have to worry. And it's so heartbreaking. I'm like, oh, I wish I could worry. I wish I could worry. You know what I mean? I wish you were here to either be offended or get mad. I would take anything just to know what you think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's like one of the on the other hand, I'll never hurt his feelings if they would have been hurt. But maybe they wouldn't have been hurt. Maybe he would have loved it. I think that also my parents were excited for me to do the thing that they couldn't do. You know what I mean? They can't talk about it. So, I think it gave them pleasure to live vicariously through me on some level.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I liked your dad's secrets within secrets with you. I won't say what, but I think that really established what your relationship was like, hearing that little tidbit.
Yeah. Thanks. It was, yeah. And I hope that comes across too, because I think most adolescents have contentious relationships with the adults in their lives. But there was also, but of course, like I said, it's complicated. And there was a lot of understanding there as well.
Yeah. I lived overseas when I was younger. My dad worked in the oil industry, being from Texas, which now as an adult, I'm like, is my dad part of the supervillain of the world? No. I didn't think of it that way.
I knew a lot of oil people growing up, actually.
Yeah.
In certain countries, there would be you'd go to an international school and it would be are you military or are you oil? Are you government? What are you here for? What are you here for?
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to the International School of Brussels. And so was in kind of the same environment of a mix of Americans and a lot of Brits and stuff. And one thing, I was younger, I was kindergarten to second grade ish. But one thing that I remembered a lot that I never experienced in the States, the whole time I was here, until all of our mass shootings cropped up, was bomb scares and just how common that was. And, as a little kid, whenever we got a bomb scare, it was teachers somehow made it exciting. We'd go outside and sing. We didn't enjoy this thing.
That's wild.
Yeah. And when I moved away, a few years later, they actually did find a bomb. I mean, because there are so many important children of important people there, ambassadors and everything.
Yeah.
Where, this is a way to directly get to people. So in your school, if you're able to share, did you have any similar experiences?
Yeah, actually, it was very, I think that every now and then, actually, I think the only bomb threats I remember were actually pranks from kids, but it was that kind of a place. I mean, it depended. I had a very varied, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. My mother was very keen on getting us the best education possible. And she wasn't, always satisfied with the international school option, which would be where all Americans would sort of automatically send their kids. Right. I mean, I went to a ton of American and international schools. So it really would depend. But often, yes, in those international schools, the thing that we had most in common, I mean, you'd look at the student body and it'd be very diverse, in terms of ethnicity and cultural backgrounds. But what they all had in common is crazy privileged. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you were privileged in some level just to be there. Yeah, I mean, like we're talking armed guards, bar, you know, like you couldn't just like wander off campus, you know what I mean? Like it would be, in some of the schools I went to, there were tragic stories of, you know, kids kidnapped. And, you know, I lived in places where kidnapping was a cottage industry, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, the schools were, it was a different, point of view. Yeah.
No, yeah, I completely understand. It's kind of like living in a fantasy world when you tell people like the type of people that you went to school with, or I don't know, like the neighborhood you lived in. Like we had to live inside a gated neighborhood, like you're talking about privilege.
Yeah.
Just because you know, you're in this environment where you're like, we live next to generals and princes, and here are all these people that could be attacked that have to be like an extra protected. So
it's very strange because, and you're also like, you're outside of, you're within this world and you're also outside of it because I'm assuming that like when you moved back to the States, you didn't re-enter, you know, like that sort of like the gated, you know, like, yeah, I mean, there were countries where I lived in like literally like where we had guards or, you know, everybody lived behind like 7-foot walls. Those types of neighborhoods, like I'm familiar with them.
Yeah.
But but that kind of sort of like level of, but at the same time, you know, we'd come back to the States and we would just be normal people, you know what I mean? Like, it was interesting. It's a different, there's a sort of like, it's a definitely is culture. And like, and it's actually very exciting. I always get so excited when I meet people like you, because on some level, you know, like I'm like continually throughout my adult life, very attracted, not just to Americans who lived overseas, but also any sort of like intercultural person, you know, so a lot of, you know, so that's, you know, immigrants who either like, who came here and no longer feel like they're from there, but not fully from here kind of thing. Like that informs you, that sort of that ability to the experience of actually engaging in a different culture disassociates you from like all of your cultures in, I think, a very positive way. At least it was a positive experience for me. I spent a long time like feeling rootless and homeless, but ultimately I'd rather have that than not, you know?
Yeah. And I think what's something to add for people listening to this and interested in the book is I think the best way to pinpoint like that transition from, you know, living in another country for you and moving to the States was you couldn't even walk a block to your school.
Yes.
Versus here in the US, we're like, you know, I think back during the time that we grew up, you know, I think we're around the same age, like growing up in like 80s, 90s. Like that was a time where your parents would be like, ride your bike to school as many miles. Right. I don't want to drop you off.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The constraint of sort of like the continual, but at the same time, I mean, that's the ultimate paradox, of course, is that they took me to all of these places only to like be obsessive about protecting me. But but they took me there, you know what I mean? Like, it was interesting that I did suspect sometimes. I was like, are you really scared of what's out there here, or are you just scared of losing me? You know, when my senior year of high school, I graduated in 2000. And do you remember Y2K?
Oh, I
remember when everybody thought that like at the stroke of midnight, when at 1999 into 2000, like that all the computers were going to stop working, and you know what I mean? Because my mother wouldn't let me go out to a New Year's party because she said Y2K was going to happen, and she wanted to be home when the world ended, I guess. And I was like, I don't even buy this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Oh, so that is crazy. I was really intrigued by you sharing a bit of your sexuality in there, because I think outside of your parents being in the CIA, I think sharing those sexual experiences is almost like peeling the onion layers off yourself and even harder to share, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, it wasn't tough to talk about it. I'm a really open person. I love talking about sex, in general. But I wanted to tread very carefully because, again, it was complicated, and I wanted to make sure that I made it clear what I was talking about, if that makes sense. And there again, there were versions of this book that could have gotten a little sexier. I could have turned up the volume on certain aspects of my high school years. But I did want to be sort of it's YA, so sex is definitely on the table, but I didn't want to be sort of I don't know. It was just very interesting to sort of you have to be careful because one of the things that sort of my editor pointed out is you don't want to get into tropes. You don't, you know what I mean? And I think that people will kind of fill in the gaps if you're not careful to tell them, if you don't sort of control the narrative. Does that make sense?
I guess so. But what if your life is an actual trope?
I mean, I guess that's the thing. I wanted to I guess my only point is that I wanted to be, I mean, if it is a trope, that's fine, but I wanted to make sure that I was telling the truth, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered the question or not.
I mean, I guess, was there any hesitancy in you sharing, kissing a girl? I mean, that's basically probably the edgiest of the bit, besides getting in a car.
Yeah, I know, right? I think there was some. I tried to be as conscious as possible about sort of how I was going to talk about that part of my life. Yeah. And there is a part of me that's oh, my mom's going to read this, oh, well.
Yeah, absolutely. Or your in-laws or whatever, all these people that you're
gosh, you're right. Thanks, Liz.
I didn't share this
thought
with
about
you.
that yet. Yeah. I don't usually talk about it at Thanksgiving dinner, how many girls I've kissed. But
but I think that's important, because that just wasn't really something that was discussed when we were growing up in high school. And
that was another thing I thought about, though, too. I think that at least American teenagers, and I guess depending on the culture and depending on sort of their environments, for me in the 90s, this was very taboo. This was a secret worth keeping in the 90s. And I don't know if this is a secret worth keeping for a lot of young women growing up today, at least depending on where they're growing up. And that's incredibly exciting. So that is also one of the things I needed to be careful about. I didn't want to be whoa, this is right. so wild. And then somebody be reading it today and be but why? I've had X amount of so many girlfriends or whatever. But so I needed to sort of treat it as it was, but for an audience of today, you know what I mean? And I mean, frankly, I'll just name it. I just wanted to make sure it was not that it didn't inadvertently come off as homophobic.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
No. Yeah, absolutely. Cause it's your choice versus how people would view your choice. And that's where the homophobia would come in.
Yes. And it's very, it's sort of, and that's a line that I had to sort of watch. But I'm glad that you were receptive to it. And I was, and I really am happy to talk about it because honesty sort of above all else. And in general, like I said at the top, I'm kind of actually, at least when it comes to talking to people, very, very probably too open, honestly.
No, I'm right there with you. We're like, I don't even need a drink to get to me. Just ask questions.
I know. Exactly.
No, that's right. I mean, but it did mean a lot to hear that. And, yes, you're absolutely right. I think the perspective of a younger YA reader today, like, might not pick up on that. But, like I was being called Liz, having the name Liz in the 90s. Like, you're just getting like Lesbo or Leslie Liz. And like that was going to offend me. Like, even I was like, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was like, who gives a shit? Like,
no, but there's a different, like, not only that, like being accused of like, being super gay when it like shouldn't be a thing, but like I'm being like even being slut shamed and then being like there's nothing wrong with being a slut, however don't shame me, like, but do you get to yell that at me, you know what I mean, like
no, totally. My goal as a writer is to write a novel where like the female lead who you're rooting for is a total like quote unquote slut. I mean, because like that's so weird to deny teenagers sexuality.
Right.
It's ridiculous to me.
Yes.
And there are and to deny women like their sexuality specifically, because if it was the other way around, it wouldn't even be, discussed. And I don't think that's really changed that much, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could have changed more. I'd like to think that we live in a more sex positive world than the one that I grew up in, but I'm not. Like I said at the top, I think it kind of depends on where you're living or your parents or what their experiences were. I'm excited to raise my kids with no shame around this kind of stuff. I mean, shame has its place when you do something shameful, but these things are not at all. Yeah, on one side, like on one hand, I'm like feel lucky that I had like a strong enough sense of self to do whatever I wanted anyways. But I do hope. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of things to parse. But I do love your idea for a book where, your hero is sort of like a slut with no consequences. I mean, that would be fantastic. As a proud slut myself, yes. I support it.
No, exactly. We're togetherness. I had a friend and his band was called Sluts. I was like, do you make t-shirts? Because I need a t-shirt.
That would be adorable. Yeah.
Okay, so one of my other favorite things about the book is when you talk about putting on makeup and then you talk about glitter gel, which I was like, oh my God, I totally forgot about glitter gel. Like, other generations might not appreciate it. It might be coming back. Who knows?
Probably will. I mean, I'm sure it's out there too.
Oh, I'm sure, but not to the point where you go in the book, you're like, it's all over. It's on places you can't see. Did you have to pull back and like think about, because that was a memory that like I blocked out. But how did you come up with those things that were just very like 90s, early aughts specific?
Thanks. I'm super glad you enjoyed that part of the book, because it takes up like a page or two. And I was very worried that somebody was going to come along and be like, you can clip this. But for me, it was like so pleasurable to include. I just, that was just like a full like memory bomb, remembering getting ready was at that age as much fun as getting to the party. Right. And I used to spend sometimes just as long getting ready as you would actually be at the party. And just the sort of the pleasure of, as an adult, in theory, at least, I try and control myself, but I can buy and do whatever I want. But the sort of the pleasure of like discovery and still having treasures and, like a friend who's got a full pot of glitter gel, like that's like gold, and just like the funny. And then I just sort of like thought that at the end, it also like the character of Beth, it's sort of it doesn't show just like the mentality of girlhood in that era, but just her mentality as well. Like, oh, but just, it's just a little bit. You just put a little on your eyes and on your cheeks and then literally naming every part of her body. It's like, it's just a little, but that's how we wore it, man. We were covered in glitter with some, and then, it was fun. It was the best.
I appreciated that.
Thank you.
I appreciated you including like the mean girl aspect of being, friends with the mean girl. And it's a very like female relationships are just so complicated. And you really, really covered that and in a respectful way. Did you have a female editor or?
I did have a female editor, the amazing Susan Rich at Little Brown. She got it. I don't know. Yeah.
That's why I asked that, because I feel like a male editor might not understand those like subtle like complications of a female relationship, especially a teenage girl relationship.
Yeah, is everything okay with the, sorry, actually, is everything okay with the audio? Cause it like changed, but I don't know if that's me or if that's you.
I think sometimes Zoom just kind of like might get overloaded.
I'll just keep talking. No, it was actually very important for me to have a female editor because, in general, because of, this is a story of, girlhood, and what it means to be a woman, like navigating this stuff. And I felt very strongly there were a lot of things that ended up like I had to cut, like I couldn't talk about everything I wanted to talk about or everything that I felt in those years. But one of the things that I was very insistent on preserving, and I didn't have to insist very hard with my editor, was just how complicated our social relationships are. And I didn't want to tell the story of not one relationship defined my high school years. And I really did have these like divergent groups of friends who, it's just something I want to, please excuse the phrase, normalize, like, because so many stories of high school, like really lean into the clickiness of things, and things are clicky for sure, but they're also usually, we're more accessible to each other than we think. And so I'm glad you appreciated that, because like if I'd reduced like my high school friendships to one relationship or one sort of type of relationship, it would have just been a flatter story. And there are people that I felt safe with, and then there were people I didn't feel safe with, but that was also thrilling. And I loved them for it in a way, I had mean girlfriends and we had a blast. Were they the people that I was going to, trust with certain other stuff? No, but like, that's life too. We're not supposed to, even in our like romantic adventures, like not everybody can be everybody to us. We seek different things from different people.
I think that's where you avoided a lot of tropes that come with girls and high school stories and whatnot. So I really appreciated that, especially being somebody who came off as like I didn't feel like you were attached to one group of people. In the book, you do encounter the same people, but I didn't get a sense of like, that's your crew, that's your posse, and nobody else can come in.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't my experience, at least. I'm sure other people do have that experience. My only regret is that I had to clip as many people from the story as I did. That was really, really painful. They're like really good friends who I feel are just in the background, but that's fine,
Yeah, you can see yourself in the back of like the panel on page 56. And
yeah,
is that what you're going to have to tell people?
Yeah, I know.
Well, last couple of questions here to like round it out. What has press been like for the book? I don't know how much you've done, but I imagine it's like CIA heavy.
I think people are very very interested in that aspect. This is, I think it's about to like start gearing up, like, but this has been good for me, actually, just talking to you right now today, because I've been nervous about like certain questions. Yes. Specifically around, the agency. And I guess there's a twofold one, just sort of like my natural, habit of being evasive around the subject. And the second thing I'm nervous around is I want to deliver, you know what I mean? And I'm worried that people are like, where's the juicy stuff? You know what I mean? And I'm like, is this not juicy enough? You know what I mean?
I think you're going to have maybe a difficult time with that, though. Do you think? I mean, I sense that, but just to be honest, do you feel that a little bit?
In terms of what?
Like what you can share, what you feel comfortable sharing with versus like what people are going to try and pry out of you. I mean, here's an example. I am not a Trump fan. I did not vote for him. But the only thing that I feel like a lot of us wanted to know was like, is he going to spill if there are aliens? Like, we want to know if you're going to spill all the government secrets. Like, give us that. I know.
Short answer, yes. I'm just kidding. But it's complicated. Just kidding. Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess my answer, sort of the thing that I rehearse is like, if you want to know something that I feel I can actually answer, but don't feel comfortable answering in a podcast or an interview or a panel, that we can have a private discussion afterwards. You know what I mean? Like, there are things obviously that if the mics weren't on, I'd be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But, I'm going to be careful around it just because, like, out of respect, honestly, for the people who do this work. And I guess one of the things I am very nervous around is that people having an opinion about the agency and like what that means. And obviously there are people who are not fans. Most people have just been very curious overall. And and that I find that's a feeling I relate to, But if people have sort of like, if there's like any sort of like political opinions around it, that's probably where I'm like more nervous, because ultimately, intelligence is necessary work. All countries have and work with intelligence. And the people who do it, make great sacrifices. So I really actually over and over and over, I defer to the point of view of having like profound respect for the people who like risk their lives and not just their lives, who give up things that we take for granted, intimacy in interpersonal relationships, family, the ability to have a home, who they give that all up. And maybe they give it up because they love their work. My father loved his work. But they also do it ostensibly in the service of a greater good. And whether or not you agree with certain actions or certain policies or what X, Y, or Z, government faction has done under X, Y, or Z president, ultimately, like I said, I defer to, respecting people doing what they think is right. And so, so like that's that sort of thing. Yeah. I'm like anticipating like, will I get any sort of pushback or interest, or just, will people pry? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, so far everybody's been very respectful and very curious and very, enthusiastic sort of about like, the nature of telling this story, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And living in the DC area where everyone pretty much works for the government, it's really interesting to be, oops, there's my computer. It's really interesting to like somehow be in the car with like a retiree from like the government, and they'll tell you what they did. And then right away they'll be like, I can't tell you anything about it though. Yeah. Like, then why did you even tell me?
Well, that's like, it's funny because I think a lot of people, are, in Nova, in the DMV, at the DC area, the greater DC area. Yeah. There are a lot of people who are doing like very, like there's a lot of secret clearances and they can't talk about it. But I don't think it's in everybody's nature to actually keep secrets. I think it's very difficult to keep your mouth shut about the work you do. So confidentiality being like a requirement for half the work in DC is interesting because I don't think it's in our natures. Honestly, I don't think that it's in our natures. Our natures are to share, our nature is to connect, and secret keeping ultimately is in some ways, well, and I guess I talk about this a little bit, like it probably made my family closer. So in that way it enhanced our intimacy. But it also is a challenge to intimacy and connections outside of ourselves as well. So yeah.
Yeah. You did a great job navigating a very difficult story to tell and difficult relationships. And I'm so excited for everybody to check out the book. So if you don't mind, Sophia, telling us when the book comes out and where people can find it.
Passport comes out November 2nd this fall. I'm super excited. It's about 2 months away. It's available for pre-order. You can, and that can happen at your online retailer, your Amazons, your Barnes and Nobles, IndieBound. You can also go into your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you, which is a great thing to do for those businesses which are engaged with your community. So if you love your local bookstore, go in and ask them if they're ordering Passport. And they'll order it for you. And where else? Yeah. And then on November 2nd, you should be able to pick it up in any bookstore and on the various online platforms. What else?
No, you nailed it. That's okay, great. Because this is your debut novel, right? Or a graphic novel?
Yeah. I mean, I've been self-publishing, as you well know, because we've been rubbing shoulders on the indie comic circuit for a minute.
Yes. Long time, actually.
Many years, many a decade. So, and this is also why I'm so excited just to see your face. I'm like, oh, it's kind of like our own SPX. Not really.
Yes, and that's coming in a week, so that's perfect.
I know, right? So I've been self-publishing, but this is the first time, yes, that I've had a formal traditional book publishing experience. And this is my first truly full length project. So yeah, this is my debut graphic novel or graphic memoir or whatever the proper term. I think I saw the term on, I was looking at comic books online the other day and I saw the term graphic novel memoir. And I just love that, we are so desperate for a proper vocabulary to describe what these things are, but it's a comic. It's 300 pages. Yeah.
Oh, that is a huge, huge accomplishment. Graphic novels take a long time, especially writing and illustrating, which is important to put out. So congratulations on taking on that big feat.
Yeah, thanks. It didn't mean to make it that long, but it's hard to edit your life. So
I imagine so. Maybe we'll get a sequel out of you eventually.
We'll see. I think I'm good for memoir for now. It was a complicated undertaking. So I think I'll wait a minute until I'm sure I have another sort of memoir in me, but I think I'll take a moment away.
Yeah, you deserve a break. Well, thank you, Sophia, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz. This has been so delightful, and it's always lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much to Sophia for being on the show. Passport is out now, and you can get it at any local bookstore, wherever books are sold, Amazon. The reviews are amazing. And, congrats to Sophia. That's really hard to do, to release a book into the world and just have it be so successful. It's no surprise because it's a really good piece, and her story is just fascinating. I feel like it should be turned into a movie, as we talked about in the episode. I wouldn't be surprised if it does. All right, go check out Sophia in my show notes. I'll have all the links there to where you can celebrate and see all her good works, and also her comics and everything that she creates, outside of the beautiful Passport. She's been creating cool stuff for a very long time. The movie I recommend with this episode is The Mole Agent. It might sound like a familiar title to you because it was nominated for an Academy Award. I guess I have my letterbox there. I've decided to start doing this so that I don't have to keep recording and being like, what is this? I came out in 2020, and Okay, it's in the documentary category, although I don't think it should be. I think a documentary should be like 100% pure. But the reason why I say that is because it's kind of a setup scenario. Essentially, this woman is worried about her mother in this old folks' home, and the documentarian goes through and hires, interviews all these like cute old men to go and be the mole in this retirement home to check in on the mom to see if she's okay. It's a really cute, adorable story. The little old man that they pick, it touches your heart. Everything that he's doing in there, is very genuine. It's just, when you see the documentary, the setup is just, there's no way that it wasn't like, tweaked a little bit, but it does it in a charming way, and it doesn't bother me in that sense. It's a great story. It matches perfectly with CIA secret agent parents and finding out secrets. So go check out The Mole Agent. And with my Letterboxd here, look, it's streaming on Hulu, Canopy, and Hoopla. You can also get it on iTunes. So many options. Also, if you are into movies, definitely follow me at Cuddles and Rage on Letterboxd. I'm always checking out some weird stuff. Until next time, guys, please have a wonderful, fun, and safe, I would say weekend, but honestly, I'm like posting these at random times, so have a wonderful and safe life, guys. Until next time. Mwah! Bye-bye.